All right, so we have a lot going on. We are catching up over months of our last video, Unlocking Mystery Babylon. And we've seen everything. As we're recording here, it's December 1st. We're in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic known as COVID-19. We're in the middle of an election season. We see everything from corruption to fraud, sifting through that, discerning through that. Recently here at Gathering Place Church, we just finished up a series going through 1st and 2nd Peter, and the current message we preached was called Power Under Pressure. And what the big idea for that is that in a culture as the church, when we see the pressure rise, we know that God gives us tools, He gives us resources, He gives us His word, that the power can reach the pressure. So at Shubot.com, we've seen you guys keep a close eye on cultural events, world events. I want to throw a question out to you, Ted. What are we seeing happening December 1st, 2020? What's going on with COVID-19? Where are we at? What are you seeing?
So what I would say about coronavirus, there's a lot of speculation about coronavirus, a lot of conspiracy theories about coronavirus. They may be true. I don't know. You know, truth is a lot more strange than fiction. Yeah. Nonfiction is a lot stranger than fiction. Yeah. So we don't really know everything, right, as to what is happening. But what I will say is that with this whole coronavirus situation, what I do see taking place is people becoming more and more radicalized, and coronavirus really exposing this reality in today's society. Yeah. It exposed something that was already there, but I think it further amplified it. So you tell people to wear a mask, you tell people to social distance, you tell people, well, you know, you can't have too many people in a room or in a building. And you have one whole half of the country who say, well, this is necessary. We have to do it to protect our society and yada, yada, yada. These are the Democrats. And then you have the other side, the conservatives, who are saying it's a conspiracy to control us. It's the Illuminati. It's the Antichrist, et cetera, et cetera. And so people are becoming more and more. This country was already polarized, but COVID, I think, really amplified that division. And you see this also in Germany. Germany, when COVID first happened, Germany had slightly more lenient rules when it came to coronavirus. But now you got over 1 million cases in Germany. So the Merkel government has been imposing heavier restrictions on the people to the point where, you know, you can't be in a room with a certain number of people. And that has angered a lot of people in that country. And just a couple of weeks ago in the city of Leipzig.
People than what we've seen in America? Is there different responses to
Yes, I would say it's different because we've had anti-COVID demonstrations in America, but not at the numbers that we've seen in Germany. For example, in the city of Leipzig, just a couple of weeks ago, there were over 20,000 people who popped up, and they were all demonstrating against the anti-COVID rules, the anti-COVID laws. And together in one giant crowd, you had conservatives, you had literally neo-Nazis walking around, you had extreme right-wingers, and then you also had a group of people, they call themselves lateral thinkers. I don't know the term in German, but in English they're called lateral thinkers. And these are people who have been really leading the movement against the anti-COVID rules. So it's people who think that, well, the government is after us and they're going to kill us. This reinforces that suspicion. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when people are reinforced in their ideas, they become more and more angry because they're so assured of themselves. So COVID, the restrictions on COVID are exposing this reality.
Yeah.
They're exposing this reality. And they think that, well, the government is here to control us and all that. And so they become more anti-government. And this could have some dangerous consequences, because you could have someone pop up and say, well, I'm going to save you. And this person could be worse than the government that we already have. And that's the problem with when people become too radicalized. They have legitimate grievances, right? They have legitimate concerns about government overreach and excessive government control. But what happens is that when they get too fanatical in their ideas, they could be led astray to something more dangerous.
Yeah.
Like far-right ideology, or even ultra-nationalistic ideology.
Well, Waleed, where does the church fall into place in this? As a local church pastor, obviously churches have come under attack of if we're to close, if we're to stay open, what our houses of worship are supposed to look like. A lot would say government overreach in that. I want to ask you, we see throughout the Bible, Old, New Testament, that obviously Romans 13, we honor our authority, but there's also times in the Bible where there's biblical justice involved, or there's moments that we can stand against unruly authority figures, or government that is essentially like Nebuchadnezzar, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were asked to bow to the golden statue. They defiled government law and what the executive mandate was, and they chose to stand. Therefore, there was consequences of it. And as we're talking about, how do we meet as the church, as followers of Christ, to not fall into the narrative of being radicalized or being, a part of necessarily a revolution like you're talking about, Ted, but where is the Christian, the Jesus followers, the church, where do we fall in line in the middle of everything we're seeing? What do you see is the biblical way forward for Christians to meet the pressure that we see surmounting?
There's no greater love than a man dying for his friends. That's what the Bible mandates, is that we have to sacrifice. Okay, but that doesn't mean we have to join a wave. Yeah. We have several elements at play here. First of all, you have what we've been talking about in the last couple of years, and that is a division within Christendom, a division between city and city, neighborhood and neighborhood. Isaiah chapter 19, where they have turmoil to the point you have civil unrest. And we begin to see this, as Theodore alluded to, the polarization process. In fact, Christ talked about this polarization process. Most people don't know where to find it. And then that is in Zechariah chapter 12, I believe, where he says, my mountain. When Christ says my mountain, and when John says 7 mountains, 7 kingdoms, there are also 7 kings rule the 7 kingdoms. So we know that a mountain is a kingdom. When Christ says my mountain, he's talking about his kingdom that he intended to establish on earth, the earthly church. And he says it will split. We think this is a literal physical Mount of Olives splitting in Jerusalem. That might be true, but there's also an allegorical interpretation to this, and that is the kingdom itself on earth is going to split. Some will go eastward, some will go westwardly, southerly and northerly, this kind of thing. And then what does he instruct? He says, you run into the valley. The valley will be azal. Azal literally means seclusion. In other words, do not fall into these waves. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, we ourselves made that mistake in falling into this wave or that wave. In other words, he's saying there's no such thing as right wing or left wing in this case for the church. You're neither right or left, you're the church, run into the valley. Beware, he's saying, beware of this polarization issue. And we're tempted to jump into it and say, okay, this COVID mania is a control over the population. It is. Look at the churches. I mean, in New York, churches couldn't have except 25 people when it can house 1,000 people, yet a bar or Ted could even expound on it. they could have more people. So what's the idea? The idea is to keep the churches as empty as possible. They know they have payments to make. They know there's no plate going around to collect the donations to make these payments. They know that the church facility in the building is going to go bankrupt. They know that they're going to take that facility, sell it, and destroy the churches. And so thank God for the judges in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the Supreme Court, I thank God for what Trump did. You know, he put in Supreme Court judges who are reasonable and good. And so, as I was discussing with your father the other day, I said, I look at the judges. They're not the problem. The Supreme Court, yeah, there's issues with the Supreme Court. We have liberal Supreme Court judges, but the Supreme Court is not the problem. The problem is the politics that goes on and the corporations that are behind it and the elitists who are behind a lot of things. So the judges saved us out of that one. And they said, no, you can't really restrict the church, you know. So this is the tug of war that's happening in the United States, where you have half the population, the Democrats or the liberals, saying, why should we care about the churches? Or why should we? And the judges are saying no, you know. And so the country now, the Democrat, they want the Biden, Kamala Harris. You know, we don't want Trump. We want to change the Supreme Court. We want to pack it, maybe, you know. In other words, the people don't want the judges. And, you know, the story in the Bible, you know, they said, you know, we want a king like other people. The judges are okay. And so the judges are basically balancing this issue. And so we see this issue of polarization. We see also we need to focus on the dragon. You know, he goes after the woman. You know, the woman runs into the wilderness, into this valley, if you will. There's this dragon element. You know, Ted is talking about Germany. And we've been writing articles about Turkish invasion of Armenia. That's also a factor. In other words, what is the church not focusing on? Okay. While COVID was happening, what was the dragon doing? And where were we? You know, tell me a name of a church or a prophecy club or people who are interested in biblical prophecies were talking or discussing what's going on in Armenia when Azerbaijan invaded Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh. And they were using drones and sophisticated weaponry and all these things. They didn't have that kind of capability, Azerbaijan. Armenians, they defeated them in the last war when they took Nagorno-Karabakh, which was really part of Armenia. And so now, as soon as this election was going on, and as soon as this whole mess was going on with the elections, and everybody's focused on the elections, what was the dragon doing? And that, you know, as soon as, in other words, the church needs to be very careful not to focus where everybody else is focused, and to focus other places. And that's where we need to be focused.
Well, and let me ask you this, Waleed, and I want to pose kind of a lot of our subscribers who follow you guys have been asking questions, and Jody, I want you to ask the question on speaking of the dragon. As we see all this COVID stuff going on, what are we missing with what a lot of what our subscribers are asking?
Yeah, the biggest question is are we going to start seeing ISIS pop up again now that Trump is potentially going to be out?
You see, this is, again, a good phenomena of where are Christians so misfocused? The questions always tells me they're misfocused. You know, I used to go speak at churches, and the question answer came, and they always ask me, is Obama Muslim? Is Obama going to do this? Is Obama, do that? Obama's gone, and, is ISIS going to come back? And this kind of thing. Well, forget ISIS. ISIS is simply going to be recruited back into this dragon, into this Ottoman entity. I mean, Syria, look at the Islamists fighting in Syria. Where did they end up? They ended up going with Turkey, going to fight in Armenia. And so, but Christian Americans are worried about their hide. Are we going to see a pressure cooker bomber? Get your mind off the pressure cooker bomber and ISIS and focus on where the big ISIS is, and that is the Turks and how they're aiding Azerbaijan into taking Armenia. What's so important about this Armenia thing? Excuse me. And when you talk Bible, Gog of the land of Magog, and you look at Magog, if they're invading Jerusalem from a land of Magog, where is this Magog?
Yeah.
You know, it's the landmass between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. And what's between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea? Answer, Armenia. Okay. So I remember when I first, became a Christian, 1993, sitting in a Baptist church. And, my buddy David Olson teaching Sunday school, he says, Armenia is between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. So what does Armenia have to do with this invasion? It's got a lot to do with it. And so they don't focus on this Armenia thing, And that also brings another issue, if Armenia is persecuted, that's the church is persecuted. Is Armenian Christians not part of the church? Are they not part of Christendom? In fact, the first Christians were Syria, then Armenia. Those are major players in Christendom, in the history of the church. Yeah. And so we need to be focused on Armenia. And also, once Azerbaijan take Nagorno-Karabakh, they also took a place in Greece, which they have occupied, a resort too, and that's been occupied for a while, and then it was owned by Greeks. Now, no longer the Greeks can do anything there. It's all the Turkish invasion. And so the Turks are taking advantage of the COVID issue, the president election. So every time there's something going on where the giant is, giant being the US, he's busy being in some other issues. That's where the dragon is playing, and the dragon is playing already. So that's a very serious issue that the church needs to be focused on instead of ISIS. Yeah. To be focused on what's going on in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Remember the stands, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, the southern parts of the Russian Republic. All these will be part with Turkey, and that includes Azerbaijan, which will be part of this conglomerate, the North Quarters, the chief prince of Mashkh and Tubal, The Russians weren't able to even aid the Armenians in this one, even though they're an ally of Armenia. Now, what is the position of the United States when it comes to Armenia? Well, they don't care. Why? Well, because Armenia is an ally of Iran. And so Armenia has to be an ally of Iran. It has to be an ally of Russia being in that region, And so the Russians gave them the cold shoulder. America doesn't really care about them. And that's the story of the church, basically. No one, look up Isaiah 63. No one, the suffering of Christ. So the Christian is going to suffer. And we see already, that the churches are suffering in America itself when it comes to this COVID. Yes. Look, my son Carlos comes in every day. He says, okay, Dad, yesterday was 800 COVID. He always tells me 0 deaths. La, 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 0 deaths, or 6 dead, or whatever dead. You look at the death rate now, it's very low. It's almost nothing. And so, it's killing the elderly people. At some point in time, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I don't have evidence for it, but if I am to be a conspiracy theorist, I would say this COVID thing could have been a planted thing. It could have came out of a lab in China, but it doesn't make sense that it came on humans. Usually it's animals, then human, and not human to animal. You had mink in Denmark. You got 1.18 million mink culled as a result of human transferring COVID to animals, to the mink population. And so it's not making any sense, And then you had President Trump, President Trump basically was ousted, whether it's through fraud. I suspect there's something going on. You don't have a spike in 90-some percent, 100% voting for Biden at 3 o'clock in the morning, And it's obvious Trump was the victor in this election. There is something going on, but it takes too long for the Trump administration to really investigate. It could take years to investigate the elections. And by then, a president is sworn in. And, Trump was saying, we have the vaccine. And he was right. We had the vaccine. And as soon as this election is done, all of a sudden Pfizer comes up, yeah, we got the vaccine. What's going on here? Is it possible that President Trump wanted to make because he's a doer. He wanted to make the prescription drugs cheaper because you got the pharma, very major power in America, the pharmaceuticals. Is it possible the pharmaceuticals wanted to get rid of Trump? He's being a pain in the neck for the Chinese, for the pharma, for everybody. We got to get rid of this guy. This guy's Braveheart. He's got to go. And so. But thank God, for President Trump for putting the judges. That's going to buy us some time, but we can see already where it's going. It's going exactly where we're saying, that this dragon is going to grow, that the American population, not just American population, this COVID thing, okay, it wasn't hitting a state. It was hitting the United States. It was hitting Europe. It was hitting China. It was hitting everywhere. So what's going on now? What's going on is that, you got to have a COVID vaccine, you got to have it in your passport, in Europe. So pretty soon it might come here. Your passport has to be stamped now. You got to
want to do that in England.
Okay. And so
make a vaccine pass.
Yeah. So what we're seeing here is
the
really
real thing that we're seeing already being construed or talked about is they're wanting to have some kind of stamp or thing you show that you've been vaccinated to have access in and out of the country, even to the place it access in and out of the store.
Well, what it's going to boil down to is that you cannot buy or sell unless you have a stamp of some sort.
Yeah.
That's where it's going to. But, while you might say it's legitimate to have somebody have a stamp somewhere for a COVID, but there will be some point in time an illegitimate stamp that you don't want that says you can't do this unless you do that. And so the idea of grounding an entire population, can you tell Americans, all Americans, you're grounded? It's something serious. You tell Europeans, you're grounded. What is that doing? It's causing a polarization where one half of the country says, yeah, you should be grounded. And the other half says, no, I don't want to be grounded. I'm an American. I believe in freedom. So the other thing that we find out also is the migration process from cities to rural areas. So while the devil is at work, God is also at work, and so I see it here, people moving more to the rural, leaving the cities, leaving, let's say, states with high taxations to more of the American kind of life that we all want. Californians leaving, New York leaving. So the idea of living a city life becomes kind of a scary thing because defund the police. When did we ever dream about, okay, we got problems in America. I've known we always had problems in America. We have crime, we have drug problems, we have all kinds of problems.
Yes.
But whoever thought that the biggest problem we have as Americans is the police?
Mm-hmm.
It's like what? It's like what? It's like the biggest problem we have is they have water in your house. You have electricity in your house. That's the biggest problem. Why is that a problem? It lights my house. I drink water. I need the water. Well, that's a big problem. Why is something so essential as the police becoming a problem in these major cities? And so it's really the concept of what Christ warned about, that lawlessness will abound, will become more and more. Where? In the cities. And so remember, in your own program, we were talking about was a couple of years ago, the idea of the city life is going to become more difficult. And so we're seeing this process already happening. So everything is going according to plan, except we don't know exactly how this plan in detail going to unfold, but we kind of watch. That's what a watchtower is, and that's what a watchman does. Yeah. So we kind of watch and see, whoa, what's going on over here? So we see what we have to do as Christians, since your first question, is to kind of look what's happening and see where it matches the scenario of what Christ warned and what the prophets warned and what Isaiah warned about, and kind of take precautions. Be ready, is to be ready. To be ready is not just spiritual ready. To be ready is also physical ready. Yeah. Noah wasn't just spiritually ready. He built an ark. Yeah. Abraham wasn't just spiritually ready. He mounted the camels and caravan and went from Ur of the Chaldees
He
to
had
the
an
promised
army.
land. He had an army with
He had a
him.
private army.
Moses, So being ready is also a physical application too. When Christ says, 5 virgins, 5 says, hey, I don't have any oil in my lamp. Yes, that's spiritual, but it also is literal,
Mhm.
So the people who are watching, are preparing,
Well,
have enough stack of food, have enough,
right.
issue. Because, we are going to go through a downturn as we see a democratic success here. And
You see this too, Waleed and Ted, if you want to chime in on this, is in regards to a lot of, organization, businesses, churches, for example. I heard it said like this, is that many churches are set up more to process when change comes, not pivot. So you see organizations, businesses, churches, nonprofits, that when COVID hit, it either caused a major crash because it's just like trying to turn, a massive ship with a small rudder. It takes time, and before you see the iceberg coming, and if you don't turn in time, you're going to hit it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like just it's what technology has invited to process this so much quicker in things, is that you almost have to go from a posture of just processing and taking time to pivoting quickly. And so I know just with our church and what we had to do with having a Christian school, our church, we had to pivot quickly in order to adapt with what was being put on our table and on our plate. Mm-hmm. So Ted, as we look across the landscape of American churches, businesses, systems, and processes, is that there's been so much pivoting to, yes, be prepared, to be future fit. How do you see, yes, the church, but also just the mindset of this being something similar to post and pre 9/11, that after 9/11 everything changed? People are going to.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, there's pre 9/11 world where you could just walk into the cockpit of a plane.
Yeah.
And nobody cared.
The pilot.
Post 9/11 world where you have to show the guy your bottles of shampoo and make sure, take everything out of your bag, and
we still
do like random checks on your luggage and all that. Yeah, it's very different. And I think that the effects of coronavirus are always going to be here. Like, it's going to leave an effect that's never going to go away. And we're going to remember the pre-COVID world and compare it to the post-COVID world. Mm-hmm. I think that the coronavirus situation, it really revealed to a great extent how government sees, not all governments, but certain governments see churches. Yeah. So you brought up churches. For example, like my father said, New York City said, oh, even though your church can hold 1,000 people, because we're talking about big Catholic churches, big historic Catholic churches in Brooklyn, even though your church can hold 1,000 people, you can only have 25 people. It's like, well, wait a second. If our church can hold 1,000 people, we can have a lot more than 25 and still socially distance and wear masks and do all the protocol. Yeah. And if you can have hundreds and hundreds of people in a grocery store, and that's not going to curtail COVID, if you can have people in a casino, and that's not going to stop COVID, if you can have people at an acupuncture clinic, and that's not going to curtail COVID, then why can't you have more than 25 people in a giant cathedral in New York City? Right. And so this controversy ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the churches and the synagogues won with a 5-4 decision. Well, 4 to I think it was 5. I think it was
5-4.
Yeah, 5-4. The majority of the Supreme Court justices are conservative, and we can thank Donald Trump for that. And I did a video about this a couple of weeks saying, listen, even with all of Trump's faults, and even with all of the valid criticism that one could lodge against Donald Trump, one thing that you can't take away from him is the fact that he saved the Supreme Court for all Christians and conservatives. Mm-hmm. And if you read the statement from Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch, his statement of his concurring statement, it's really, really fascinating to read. He makes very good arguments. He says, Well, in New York City, acupuncture shops were considered essential. Well, they're not essential. Bike shops were considered essential, or they're not necessarily essential. So you can go get acupuncture. And he also brought up other states. He says, in Nevada, they opened up the casinos. Well, why is a casino essential? In Colorado, they got marijuana shops. Well, why is that essential? And he said, it's ridiculous to say that a church that can hold 1,000 people can only have 10 to 25 people. And what Gorsuch said explicitly was that this reveals how how certain governments see churches as non-essential to society.
Yeah.
Now, if churches are being suffocated, there's a couple of effects, a couple of consequences that I think we could be seeing. And one of them is more likely than the other. One, and this is already happening, is for a while now, people have been doing the online church thing, going on the internet, the Zoom, and watching the sermon or the mass. And they're getting very comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they're like, I kind of like this.
Yeah.
I kind of like just getting up in my pajamas and just watching the sermon, and then that's it.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen, even when COVID is eventually controlled, and the COVID issue isn't going to be a serious issue anymore, eventually that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to be like SARS. You could be seeing some seriously long-lasting effects detrimental to the churches, financially speaking. Now, if the churches are suffocated of sufficient funds, what eventually could happen? Eventually, and this is more in particular to the Catholic churches, the Catholic churches, especially in a state like New York, are sitting on prime real estate, especially in New York City. They're on prime real estate. You look at these cathedrals, beautiful, gorgeous cathedrals, right in the middle of the city. This is very expensive property. What happens when those churches go out of business? People are going to buy those properties and make a lot of money off of them. So what we could be seeing is some sort of a collaboration. I could be completely wrong about this, but I'm putting my conspiracy theory hat on here. What we could be seeing is some sort of a collaboration between the politicians and some very wealthy investors, real estate investors. They want that land. And they're like, well, suffocate the churches, take advantage of this COVID situation. Mm-hmm. Say, well, the churches are not essential. You can't have a lot of people, but acupuncture is essential. You can have hundreds of people in a grocery store. That's going to curtail COVID as long as we all have masks. But no. You can't go to church. Well, now if they were to say you can go to church, just wear a mask and do some social distancing. Okay, I can understand that. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying, well, you can go to the grocery store, socially distance and wear a mask, and we'll curtail the situation. But you can't go to church. Well, what's the difference? I mean, physically speaking, what's the difference between going into the church building and going into a grocery store building in regards to curtailing COVID? Well, nothing really. So, and there haven't been any recorded outbreaks coming from these big Catholic churches.
Right.
So that is, I think, one of the other things that the COVID situation reveals is governments see churches as, not all governments, but certain governments, specifically Democrat governments, see churches as non-essential. And it's really anti-clerical. A lot of this stuff is anti-clerical.
Yeah.
If you go to Rome, for example, Italy in general is inundated, filled with ancient churches, hundreds of years old. You see some of these churches from the 13th century, even older than that, some of them from the Byzantine era. Very ancient churches. They're
Constantine's time.
They're very beautiful, but no one goes to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see the effects of this in Italy, where it's like, well, no one even goes to church. And financially speaking, a lot of these churches are hanging on a hair to maintain themselves. Yeah. And so a lot of church property has been sold out. You see this in France, where Muslims bought a giant church in France and made it into a mosque. You see this sort of thing. The government will demolish certain churches. Like you see this sort of thing, and it's the result of indifference. So what could the COVID situation create? It could create an atmosphere of indifference where churches are going to be suffocated financially, especially Catholic churches.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, Catholics, I will admit, and this is not being said as an insult, this is just a fact.
Yeah.
Catholics are a lot less generous than evangelicals. And because Catholics are a minority in the United States, they're going to have a lot, I think they're going to be hit harder, whereas evangelicals are a lot more generous. So, yeah.
If you look at Judge Alito's, you know, you can watch it on YouTube. You know, Justice Alito from the
I
Supreme
watched
Court.
that video. That was really good.
Yeah, and he was warning, and he says, you know, what's coming is going to be very you know, pretty bad for the Christians in the churches.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you got nonprofits, Christian nonprofits who help and aid widows and orphans and things like that, you know, or adoption centers and all that stuff. And we got to give them to the gays and things of that sort.
Right.
And he addressed this whole thing with this gay agenda, kind of going to start pressuring, which is, you know, what the Bible talked about Sodom, you know. I mean, that's why I always tell every Christian, I said, listen, you know, look up the word Sodom in the Bible, look up the word city in the Bible or cities in the Bible, and tell me, what does the Bible say? You know, it says a lot about these things, you know. There's a lot to be said about the end times and Sodom, Egypt, paganism, and it's exactly happening, you know, it's happening massively. Yeah. I've never seen so many weirdos in my life. There's a lot of weirdos these days, you know. There's a lot of weird things these days, you know. Look at it. Have you ever looked at people's Facebook pages? I mean, just bizarre.
Yeah. Well, I think you both have hit on some very timely content and information. And Jody, if you want to throw out one last question for Wally, and then we can close down the program for today.
Well, you started touching on what I wanted to bring up is how you touched on how the Ottoman dragon is spreading its tentacles over in Eastern Europe and around the Mediterranean. What do you see as Sodom as increasing its pressure here in the United States and Western and all the Christian areas?
Well, it's obvious. I mean, 3-4 years ago, America wasn't this flamboyant about the idea of homosexual marriage. Today, even the Pope is vacillating about, you know, homosexual relationships as a union, you know, being husband and a husband. I don't know how you want to call it, but if the Pope is saying something that is vacillating, you know, with the homosexual agenda, I say we're getting very, very close to major issues.
Yeah.
Because you know, it's the idea is to bring back the world pre-church. Yeah. What was the world pre-church? It was Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was basically pagan. So, you know, we think about the Roman Empire, you know, before Christianity took over, what was it? It was Sodomite and pagan, you know. The Grecian Empire, you know, the Greeks were known, their military was known. Boy love, sodomy, and all these kind of things is rampant. Mm-hmm. So the idea is really to turn the clock back. Turn the clock back. And that's exactly what Ezekiel said. I don't know, you know, you will turn the way you were before. He talks about these two daughters of Jerusalem, Jerusalem being his church, you know. And he says, you'll go back to the way you were before. Well, you know, your sister Sodom, you know, and then Samaria and all these things. And people read this, all this context in the Bible, they don't know what to make of it. It's very obvious if you understand Christ's mindset when he says, I speak in parables, I speak in allegory. So the world doesn't get it, you know, but if you put that allegory mindset or the parable mindset of Christ, you can easily read it through. And so it's turning the clock backwards. As we move forward, you'll see the clock turning backwards and backwards and backwards. And in America, it's what does the devil have to control? The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, you know, and the Supreme Court. So if anything, pray for the Supreme Court, you know. And so that's why, I mean, if you listen to Alito's speech, everybody should hear it. I mean, it's like, he got a lot of trouble for it, a lot of flack for what he's doing. He's giving us a warning. And so what we need to do is to focus on many of these wise men that come across telling us something, and it's rare. And you hear it every now and then. You say, oh, wow, Supreme Court, Alito, is he saying something? What's he saying? Pay attention, because he's really well focused. And he's saying the same things we're saying, that the homosexual agenda is going to basically affect the church, affect society, because they're going to come to the church. They say you have to be a homosexual pastor, you have to make homosexual congregation, you have to, even the children, even your children program, you run a school, guess what? You will be tested, I guarantee it. And so that's where the rubber meets the road, the testing phase. And then so the testing is coming, and he says, that's why he says, whoever finishes the course, till the end will be saved, So it's not like, you can basically vacillate and kowtow to this kind of systems and not stand up and say no, but be careful of joining the streams that from this gorge that is coming. We're going to have two streams, left, right, and that's we got to not to join left, not to join right, but to be in the mode of azal, which is seclude yourself from all these different tides.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, well said. And we appreciate you guys going into depth on recent events, recent topics, sharing your thoughts, your facts, your study time. More information, anyone watching can visit shubat.com to catch up on recent articles. Ted's releasing a great video today. He was telling us about a recent debate as well. So be on the lookout for that on shubat.com. But we appreciate you, Mr. Shubat, Mr. Ted Shubat as well. Thank you guys for your time, and we will catch you on the next program.
God bless.
God bless.